welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to be showing you how I made my entry to the fire competition. So this is called the YouTube Cross Channel Challenge 2021 and I have made this Scorched Inferno bowl. So here's a look at it. It gets black at the bottom and rises up to a fire. So I'm really happy with this. We've got a nice flat bottom on it. I especially love this part here. That's my favourite side where it's got these like flickery bits of pine. So I'm really happy with this. It did challenge me a bit because I'm not particularly great at colouring, so I thought I would give myself a nice challenge with this, but I'm really happy with how it came out. So this bowl blank that I'm going to be using to make this Scorched Fire Inferno, this is the exact same size bowl blank I used. It's 13.5 centimetres across in its diameter and it's about 5 centimetres thick. So it's quite a thick bowl blank, but I wanted quite a deep bowl and obviously quite a small bowl as well, and I'm really happy with the overall result. As I had already cut the blank on my bandsaw, I just turned it to be perfectly round using my round scraper. It was already pretty good off of the bandsaw, but obviously you want to make sure it's as round as possible. And then I sanded up from 120 grit up to 400 grit before reversing it using a hot glue gun sacrificial method of holding this workpiece to the lathe. I then moved on to the hollowing stage of this. Again, I used my round scraper to do this, and I was shocked at how quickly it was to hollow the whole thing. I think the whole actual turning stage of this project took me about 20 minutes. It was mostly the colouring that took the time, and thinking about how I was going to achieve the colouring. Apologies that you can't really see what I'm doing here, but I wanted to make sure I was really getting a good line of sight down the bowl blank. So we're going to move on to the sanding stage now. Now I particularly like using these Abranet 120 grit sanding sheets. They leave a really smooth finish on the outside of a bowl, and they're quite expensive, but then they do last, so arguably I would actually say they're cheaper because you have to buy less of them. And as you can see, they're mesh, so you can probably see me through them, and I do think they're absolutely fantastic. I have the 120 grit, the 400 grit at the moment, and I'm going to buy the 240 and the 320. For now though, I'm just using the emery backed 240 and 320, which is fine, but I much prefer using these mesh Abranet discs. As I said, I used the Abranet sanding discs and some other sanding paper just to quickly sand it. I think I did a couple of minutes worth of sanding here. So we're going to move on to the colouring stage of this bowl now. Now for this I chose to use a product that I've never used before, which is the Intrinsic Colour Collection by Hampshire Sheen. So here's the Intrinsic Colour Collection that I chose to use for these bowls. Now I've not used this before, as I said, but they worked really well. I don't know whether you're supposed to dilute them with water or not. I didn't, and I don't think you're supposed to. Now if I get one out, you can see I've already added lovely dye all over the bottom of the bottle. I used flame to do this. I used a bit of the ruby red, and I also used some yellow, if I can find them all. Honey, this is the equivalent of the yellow. It's a really nice colour. And then I used the flame for the majority of it, along with the ruby red. And then I did also use a little bit of the burnt orange as well. And all I did was I worked up in a colour gradient, so I had the darkest bits at the bottom, and as I said, it looks like it's almost scorched at the bottom, but it's not actually scorched, it's just an extremely concentrated bit of ruby red. So I probably did 5 or 6 layers of the ruby red at the very bottom, because I didn't want it to black, because I think that would have detracted from the beauty of the bowl, and I think you wouldn't have been able to see sort of any colour gradient with it, so I chose to use the ruby red and just really thicken it up at the bottom and blend it out using the orange and the yellow. Now it was time for the bit I was most excited about, which was actually colouring this bowl. I decided to use a paintbrush to do this, which I've never ever done before, and I think this was a really good idea actually, because what happened was it meant that I could really blend the colours and make it look like a fire. So I started by applying one thick coat, working from a ruby red up to a scorched orange kind of colour, and then up to the honey yellow. And then I added lots more coats and just kept building up a colour until I was happy with it. For the inside, I think I used 2 colours, which were ruby red and scorched orange. I'm not sure what the actual name of the orange is. I think it's something like flame orange, but I think it looks kind of like a scorched orange colour. So with the outside of the bowl all sanded up, we're now going to move on to applying some wood turners blend. Now this is my Specialist Deluxe wood turning finish, which is available in my link in the bio on my Instagram pages, or you can see it in the description down below. But now we're going to move on to applying some wood turners blend. Now with wood turners blend, it's really important that you apply it in a fairly thin coat and use cellulose sanding sealer beforehand. Now I made a massive mistake with my own finishing project, which was that I forgot to apply any cellulose sanding sealer, which of course isn't great because you haven't sealed the wood, so all the colours are just going to bleed into each other and you're not going to get a nice finish. So what I did was I just rubbed it lightly with 400 grit and applied some gloss lacquer, as I'd already cut it off, taken it off the sacrificial glue plate by then, so it was too late to reapply Woodturner's blend. Now, I won't make the same mistake again, but it was quite irritating. So what I did instead was use some Chestnut Products gloss lacquer, which also leaves a really stunning finish. I tend to use gloss lacquer for things that I can't always finish on the lathe. So for example, my spheres, I always finish those with a lacquer, because obviously it's quite hard to finish something that's a spherical shape that you've got to keep moving around, because then you'll damage the finish on the other side. So this was supposed to be finished with Woodturner's blend, but instead I had to use a gloss lacquer as I forgot to apply cellulose sanding sealer. Then I applied one layer of Woodturner's blend to the inside and the outside, and as I said, I messed this up because I forgot to use cellulose sanding sealer, so I ended up spray lacquering it. So if you can see in here, there's a lot of tear out. This is pine, and it's not a particularly great wood to turn, and I was a little bit rushed with the turning of it. I could have got a much nicer finish had I spent more time on it, however, time was of the essence this evening, and I don't really want to be doing this much later into the evening, so we're just going to take it off the lathe. And this is always quite a sketchy bit. Got to get a screwdriver into there, try and knock as much of the glue away as possible. Don't worry if you get the glue come with it, just do your best. Same on this side. Sometimes you'll get big chunks come off, which is always much easier. Usually it's not this difficult. However, I was reaching the end of the sacrificial piece of wood here, and I didn't want to have to make a whole new one. I knew it was strong enough and it had enough structural rigidity in it, so I wasn't worried about that. It's just it didn't look very nice, so I knew I was going to have a bit more of a job clearing this bit up. Now, I've left the centre mark in there. If you were really fussed, you could have turned it out. I didn't bother. And I also forgot to put a nice foot on this one, but you know. And I forgot to add cellulose sanding sealer. So the whole finish on this is horrible, but the colour is pretty cool. The colour is what I wanted. Scorched Inferno. So I think I'm probably going to try and apply a little bit of a lacquer or something over this, just to try and give it a bit more of a shine. In fact, we'll probably put some gloss lacquer or something. But, pretty cool. And this finish in here, as I said, we've got all these horrible tear out marks, but to be honest, it doesn't really matter. So that's the Scorched Inferno bowl project finished. I really hope you enjoyed watching along with this. I had an absolute blast making this, and I love all the different colours and patterns that have been achieved on this. As I said, just turned out of a piece of pine. However, I don't particularly like turning pine because of the tear out, but if you get good tool presentation, you won't get too much tear out. Now on the inside, I got a lot more tear out on the outside than on the outside. The outside barely had any tear out, and that was because I was presenting the tools really nicely. It had the bevel rubbing, so it achieved a really nice finish. But if you can try some pine one day, it's okay to give it a go. I'm not a particular fan of turning pine, however, I know some people like to use pine. I'm not one of them, but I've got quite a few of these bowl blanks because I have a massive square piece of wood that I've just cut into bowl blanks, and I've got enough to make about 15 pine bowls. So I'm just going to use them as experimentations for colours. I'm not too fussed about the sizes of them, how they look, it's all about the colour. But this one, I'm really happy with the overall form and shape of the bowl, the depth, and I also am really, really happy with the colour. This is my favourite coloured bowl that I've ever done. I absolutely love all of the different patterns and how the light catches it, and I'm really, really happy with it, in case you can't tell. It's definitely inspired me to give colouring bowls another go in the future, as I do think there's a lot of colour and depth into this that I could try and incorporate into other projects. Well, thank you so much for watching. I really hope you've enjoyed watching this video. Stay tuned for the next one, which will probably be the workshop vlog in February. Thank you for watching.